This is Rick Colley, somewhat of a back to the lander. So, Dad, when and why did you first come to Vermont?
Well, I spent my high school years in a relatively small town in New York State, in the Hudson River Valley, and when the year before I moved there, K through 12 was all in the same school, and by the time I graduated from college, there were 7 schools in town, so it was part of the big influx of people in industry from the New York City area moving up the Hudson River Valley. And I preferred small town to suburban. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I knew some people who were moving up this way, and it wasn't so much coming up to be, to farm or get back to the land. As I like to ski, I like small towns, I like to have fun, and I said, why not? And that's somewhat how I ended up here.
So I guess once you got here, did you fall into any of the kind of typical back to the land categories at all? Or?
No, I think I was definitely part of the kind of influenced by the whole counterculture. I mean, at the time we had just started winding things up with Vietnam. During my college years, there was a lot of issues around the war. There was a lot of resistance against traditional culture, and I was part of that, but it wasn't so much the agricultural movement as just more part of trying to looking at things from a fresh perspective. I probably wasn't as holistic as many of the folks who wanted to get back to the land. I like the idea of sitting on the porch and playing guitar and having fun.
Okay. So I guess then, what else did you notice about other back to the landers or people, just anybody moving to the area? Aspects of the
culture.
I
think there's a whole like in society, generally. I mean, there's a continuum of people, and there were folks who were very holistic about their approach, and somewhat self-righteous, and then there were people who were maybe on the other extreme, who just had no concern for the environment and self-sufficiency, and just wanted to just take advantage of open space, and and there was everybody in between.
Mm-hmm. I guess kind of with that, what were your thoughts on the back to the land movement, or what are or opinions?
Well, I was drawn to that in a sense that I'm the kind of person that likes a sense of place, likes to feel tied to a place, and that's why, relatively early on, I bought, the land, which started as, which is our home today, and then I bought some of the surrounding land over time, and pretty early, although it was not my initial experience, moving here, but pretty quickly I got into gardening and growing food and appreciating that, and that was part of buying some land, and I had thoughts about what I might do to incorporate that into my lifestyle. Although, the reality of life and having to make a living and, didn't always work with that 100%.
Yeah. You mentioned the self-sufficiency, and then you also mentioned the gardening, which obviously brought some vegetables or fruits to the table. But I was wondering if there are any other ways in which you're self-sufficient.
Well, I bought a house that was ready for the bulldozer, and I decided to save it and borrowed some jacks from a neighbor and jacked it up and started replacing the sills, and essentially kept the original outside walls of the farmhouse, but changed everything inside and outside, and built a couple additions on top of that. First few years, I cut all my own wood. Although when I found I had to work full time, it became pretty hard to do that and work. But that, initially I was, rebuilding the home, and I like being self-sufficient anyhow. I like doing things for myself, and that fit with the lifestyle. I like to fix my own vehicles. I like to fix what's broken rather than call somebody else in every time there's an issue. Mm-hmm. So I guess that that's not directly back to the land. That whole spirit of self-sufficiency was pretty familiar or comfortable with where I was and still am, to some people's chagrin.
I guess another question would be, in today's world, do you see consequences of the Back to the Land movement? And what are they?
Well, I think it helped, heighten awareness that there's more than one way to view, not only your personal life, but the human relationship with the physical world, on a very practical level, but then on more philosophical levels, on economic levels. You look at what's happening environmentally to the world, and because of human conduct, and I think the Back to the Land movement was much more geared to being part of the natural world and finding your niche versus being in conflict with the natural world and needing to conquer it.
Mm-hmm. What about, this is kind of random, but what about people today? Like, do you see any connection between Back to the Landers in like the 70s or 60s and 70s and people moving to Thetford and Corinth and surrounding areas today? Do you see like a connection there? Or?
Yeah, I see certain young people, who are considerably younger than myself, who have something in common with what I saw, 35 years ago. And I even think that the folks who are from a different cultural background move here because of the appeal of some of the same circumstances of just being a little more in touch with your environment. Although I must say, the movement today is this whole area is way more gentrified than it was 40 years ago. So there's a little tension there between sort of the hobby farm and with a lot of money versus actually living off the land with your hands and being a little more self-sufficient.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I guess kind of something that would be cool would be if you have like specific stories about Back to the Landers or like Back to the Land, the movement in general. It's kind of sneak peek.
I probably do.
Yeah.
I remember one time my sister was visiting who just lived in a probably slightly more suburban culture, and we went to visit a friend who was probably a little more hardcore in terms of his commitment to environmental issues and this is a long time ago, but even then, burning fuel and that sort of thing. And he invited us to dinner, and he was making dinner, and we all had to wear parkas inside his house because it was so cold, because it was in the middle of winter. And that was somewhat of an eye-opening experience for my sister. I knew my friend, so I took it a little more in stride.
How did he heat his house?
Wasn't. I can't try to remember where he was living at the time. I just remember being there. I mean, my guess is it was a combination of some wood heat, but there probably was some level of backup, because I don't think it was his own place. So my guess is that there was either propane or fuel oil, but he didn't like to burn it. So
right. I guess actually I kind of forgot about a question, but were there any? What did you notice about the relationship or interactions between people moving here and the natives, of Vermont at the time?
Well, I think at first there was a certain amount of skepticism from the people who lived there a long time, because generally it was, for a lot of people, it was generational, and they went from family farms to having to find work outside of the family farm. But there was a lot of relationships between families. People knew who each other were. And then, when you got an influx of people, as much as they appreciated the land and where they were, they also tended to think that there was a little bit of a know-it-all attitude that I don't think that fairly didn't rub locals particularly well, and then it's not as if the folks who already were here were all of one mindset either. There was a range of from the most conservative to the most open. I found people generally to be very accepting if you were just honest and straightforward. Even if they thought you were a little weird, they would put up with you, and then after 40 years, they decide they like you. Maybe. But I think it was that difference of that sense of place where for a long time not that much changed that fast, and then all of a sudden the interstates came in and transportation changed, and there was an influx of people that had a vision, and which sometimes they forgot about the fact that there were people who were already here, and the reason they liked the place so much was people who were already here were doing a pretty good job of it.
Yeah. All right. I guess that's all I have to ask. Do you have any last thoughts?
Well, on to your last point, in terms of the acceptance, I had a friend who's grew up local and runs a local business, and there was at some point there was some political tension going on about some issue local, I think, as I recall, and some folks were talking about the thems and the us's, and the way he summed it up was, he said, "Why," he says, "I think the thems are becoming more like us's, and the us's are becoming more like thems."
All right. Thanks, Dad.
You're welcome.